Okay, so this is the basics of media literacy. This is a longer program. It is probably going to take the full hour. We should have time for questions at the end. Also, feel free to throw things in the chat as they come up. Okay, so what is media literacy? The NAMLE, or the National Association for Media Literacy Education, defines media literacy as an expanded conceptualization of literacy that includes the ability to access and analyze media messages, as well as create, reflect, and take action using the power of information and communication to make a difference in the world. That may seem like a straightforward definition, but there are many aspects to media literacy. Some of these are navigating. Almost everything we interact with is media, coupons, ads, books, paintings, etc. And navigating is all about being able to find what you need among everything else. There's also analyzing, which is the ability to decode the meanings and information presented through the media, being conscious of bias, and utilizing your skills to analyze the media world. And taking action. Being a good digital citizen often involves being able to spot false information, doing a bit of research before sharing or reposting, and using your skills to help others. The important thing to remember with media literacy is that it involves a lot of critical thinking. It's an active process that you do and practice as you go. No one person has all of the answers because there are no right or wrong answers. There's truthful and fact-based information, and there's untruthful and false information, but there's no right or wrong way in finding which is which. When you ask yourself how media literate you are, these are some things to consider. We will not have time to answer all of these questions, but save them to look over later and feel free to share an idea or two in the chat today if anything comes to mind. How do you find sources used in an article you're reading? Do you look into opposing viewpoints on a topic you're interested in? Where do you get most of your news? How does the media you consume affect your thoughts, beliefs, and feelings? How much media do you engage with every day, including social media, news, books, TV shows, and so on? The average American spends an average of 6 hours and 40 minutes on the internet, including about 2 hours and 23 minutes of social media time. That's the equivalent of 47 hours per week, 101 hours per year, 101 days per year, or roughly 17 years of a person's life from the ages of 18 to 80 spent online. On top of that, two-thirds of Americans get their news from social media. It's clear that media literacy is necessary just to be able to navigate today's digital world. How else can you decide whether that social media post about X, Y, and Z news update is entirely true? We're going to cover some key terms. Media message means the values and ideas incorporated into a specific piece of media. To find this, ask yourself, what purpose does this media serve and how does it present that? Media messages are what the speaker or source is trying to tell us. This can be anything at all from buy my product to vote for me. Sometimes the message is simply to tell a story, like books we read or movies we watch, but even those are frequently intermixed with messages that the authors are trying to say. Media effects are how media messages affect consumers of said media. These effects can be intentional or unintentional. How does the media you consume make you feel? This is tied to the media message. Once you've parsed the message consciously or subconsciously, it will have an effect on you. It'll make you feel something, want to take action, or do something. How did you feel when you saw that coffee ad? Did it make you feel good and want to buy the product? That's the intended effect. However, there can be unintended effects brought out by mixed messages, miscommunication, or simply reaching the wrong audience. Information is knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction. However, information is not the same thing as fact, and the source may have ill intent when presenting their information. Excuse me. Information is constantly coming at us 24/7, and that's why our brains do some automating to make sure that we're not constantly overwhelmed. We don't have to think about reading in our preferred language or tying our shoes because our brains already know that information. But when engaging with any kind of media, it's important to be somewhat engaged with what we're reading, watching, or listening to, especially if it's supposed to be factual information. Bias is favor or prejudice for or against one thing, usually in a way that's unfair. Biases can distort how we see fact and how we navigate media, and how we treat our favorite or least favorite people. Bias can often be recognized by how a news source is labeled. For example, the New York Times is often considered liberal, while Fox News is often considered conservative. But bias refers to more than just political slant. It can refer to any kind of favor or any kind of prejudice. Media messages. Encoding and decoding are part of understanding the media, and we do it every day. It's how we understand each other and how many misunderstandings happen on a day-to-day basis. What are messages that you've understood from this presentation so far? All of them have been encoded into the language and the visual information presented so that viewers can decode and understand and learn. When we don't fully understand the message, critical thinking can fill in the pieces we don't understand in order to decode messages. Think about what messages you're receiving from the media that you consume. Biases, belief, thoughts, all of that is being conveyed. Do you agree with what is being said, even if it's not being said aloud? Consider why or why not when engaging with the sources of information. To further complicate messages, there's also something called code switching, which is using a certain form of language around one person or group versus another. For example, you wouldn't speak to your boss like you would speak to your best friend, or vice versa. When we speak to different people, we often use different word patterns, slang, and terminology. Doctor speak or legalese are great examples of this, as well as the difference between how we speak to family and friends versus colleagues. What is information? Unfortunately, information does not have to be true or helpful in order to be presented to you. So always use critical thinking to spot these three forms of bad information before you fall victim to them. Misinformation is false or inaccurate information, which is not intended to cause a great deal of harm. Related to the word misinformed, misinformation simply means that information is not accurate or truthful, though the intent is not to cause harm. This can happen because someone has used poor sources, hasn't fact checked their information, or otherwise simply encountered the wrong information. An example of this might be someone in your life sharing a social media post with false information about a local news story. They did no harm by sharing it, they were simply unaware that it was inaccurate because they did not check to make sure. Disinformation is false or inaccurate information which is deliberately intended to deceive or mislead and cause harm. Disinformation is flat out deceitful. It may seem true or it may be obviously untrue, but either way, disinformation is absolutely intended to be misleading. The difference between mis and disinformation is the intent. Where misinformation is not intended to be harmful, disinformation is meant to be harmful. An example of disinformation might be an article trying to sell you on a very specific diet trick as a means to cure cancer. This information is both untrue and very harmful. Malinformation is information that begins from the truth but veers away by being exaggerated in a way that can be manipulative or harmful. Some good examples of malinformation are misleading charts or diagrams that may not present all of the facts or otherwise may not convey information in an entirely accurate way. This is done with the intent of manipulating the truth and making people see the subject in a specific and often poor light. Any kind of bad information can be harmful to an individual, organization, or a group, intended or not. Mass media outlets can and do make mistakes, but it is typically misinformation, not intended to cause harm. Clickbait articles, tabloids, and unvetted online sources, however, can and do contain dis and malinformation, that harmful stuff. A note on bias. We all have biases no matter what. Some are as simple as a preference for one type of food over another, while others can be more harmful, such as racial or age bias. These biases show up in a lot of ways and in a lot of places we may not even be aware of, including the media. Here are a few different things to be on the lookout to spot biased media and your own biases as well. Confirmation bias is a type of bias in which we see something that confirms what we already believe and then accept that as proof that our belief is correct. An example of this is when we already hold a belief, and we'll use an innocuous example here. Let's say that you believe that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, so you only seek out sources that present breakfast in a positive light because you already have those positive feelings towards breakfast. Affinity bias is a type of bias in which we favor people who share attributes with us, including likes and dislikes or personal beliefs. This one is very similar to confirmation bias, but is a little easier to spot in most cases. Ask yourself why you prefer this source over another source. Is it because you already know that particular one holds similar or opposing beliefs to you already? Attribution bias is attributing traits, beliefs, or motivations to a person's actions based on our perceptions. This is also sometimes tied to affinity bias. You're desperately looking for a source on a topic and can't seem to find anything until suddenly there it is, the one source that answers all of your questions. But just because it was the first option you came across doesn't make everything the author has to say true. Still use your critical eye to decide whether or not the information is useful to you before taking it at face value. Conformity bias. In order to feel accepted by a group, we agree with the views that may not align 100% with our own without voicing our opinions. An example of this could be that a friend shows you an article that they think is spot on and totally accurate, whereas you may not hold those same beliefs, but rather than contradicting your friend, you just kind of go along with it to feel like you have something in common. Social media algorithms are designed to only show us what we are already biased towards to keep us interested in scrolling. If you only ever saw things that you disagreed with, you wouldn't stay too long. This is what it means to be stuck in a filter bubble or an echo chamber. Did you know around 40 years ago, 50 companies owned most of the media in the US? Now, six conglomerates own around 90%. These conglomerates are National Amusements, Walt Disney, Warner Brothers Discovery, Comcast, News Corp, and Sony. When we say these conglomerates own these companies, this means that they are prime shareholders and decision makers of what happens in these companies. For example, CBS is owned by several corporations, such as National Amusements and BlackRock Advisors LLC. How do we navigate the media when there is so little diversity in it? Let's find out a few ways. These steps can help you find the best information and stay on track with your research needs. You'll start with the search. How and where you search matters. Using the right search engines and databases makes all the difference when it comes to finding helpful information. There are many options to search for information, and we'll be going over some of them in just a little while. Searching in the wrong places can lead you to harmful information. If doctors only ever used WebMD to diagnose health problems, for example, that would be a little dangerous. Next, you'll vet your sources. When interacting with the media, keep in mind that sources matter. BuzzFeed articles are not the same as a news channel. Using sources that are vetted or being sure to vet them ourselves is very important when it comes to gaining useful and truthful information. All sources are not equal, no matter how nice that would be for our brains. Next, you'll cross-check. Use multiple different sources in order to have a balanced viewpoint on a topic. Using only one can impact your bias, or you can lack the full story. If you aren't sure about the validity of the information or the source you found, it's never a bad idea to check another source. It's also useful to do this simply to gain another perspective on an issue, though keep in mind to seek out explanatory rather than reactionary news. Reactionary news is typically for shock value and attention rather than actual informative reporting. Lastly, you'll need to find balance. You only have so much time in any given day, so it's important to find a balance between being well informed and overstressed. Given what we now know about the average daily usage of social media and the internet, how can you find balance and get back to living your life when you get into a scrolling spiral? Most smartphones have screen time tracking, which can break down how much you use your phone by app. Try keeping that on your home screen or setting timers and sticking to them to keep on track with your digital goals. Scrolling all day can be mind-numbingly entertaining, but what else could you be doing with your time? Okay, so we're going to talk about the difference between domains. Domains are the address of a website represented by three letters following the period or dot. Domains can tell us a lot about the kind of source a particular website will be, so let's look at the differences between them. .gov, G-O-V, stands for government. These domains are typically some of the most trustworthy as they are government sources. However, these sources may not be free of bias. Think about a Democratic versus a Republican candidate website. Those will certainly contain bias towards their own candidates. .edu is reserved only for accredited educational sources such as colleges and universities, making them about as equally as trustworthy as .gov sources. Along with .gov websites, .edu websites are more strict about making sure that an organization is legitimate before it's allowed to have such an extension. Educational institutions are not always free of bias, however. .net domains stands for network domains, meaning that they are used by companies and groups for website hosting and internal communication. .net sites are typically part of a larger group, such as a web hosting platform. They can be used by just about anyone, so it's important to make sure that either the company it represents is legitimate or use a more critical eye if it's from an individual. .org domains are generally nonprofit organizations, charities, and other types of organizations that are not primarily commercial in nature. Organizations can be anything, and while .org websites can be very useful and trustworthy, you very much do need to make sure that the source is a vetted organization, as it is not as strictly enforced as the .gov or the .edu sites. A good example of a credible .org website is using heart.org to access health information because that's the American Heart Association's website. .com domains are commercial. That means that the person or business that purchased the site can use it for anything they want. Just because someone purchased the domain doesn't automatically make it less of a source. However, keep in mind that people or businesses can use these sites for anything they want as long as it's legal. That means no slander, no libel, and nothing dark web related. That doesn't mean that they can't have false information. A good .com article or site will list sources or authors for the information that they provide. The use of these domain extensions is not strictly enforced, therefore it's important to still remember to vet these sites to spot scams and false information. So when you're looking for bias and fact in media, this is an interactive map that is highly informative and contains many, many news sources that you can look into to find their fact and bias ratings on an easy to read chart. I've included the link to this if you look in the chat. And the map allows you to click on each news source and view a breakdown of its fact and bias ratings. This map was created by Adfontes Media, which uses a team of analysts to maintain the map, and Adfontes Media admits that the map itself is biased because it's maintained by humans, and no humans are free of bias, obviously. So keep this in mind when using the map to find fair and accurate news sources. But again, that is in the chat if you'd like to check it out for yourself. So vetting your sources can seem daunting, but this acronym will be very helpful and easy to remember when it comes to vetting your sources and information. The CRAP test, or CRAAP test, was created by librarians at the California State University, and it's an excellent way to decide whether a source is credible and useful to you or not. It's a commonly used method for communications research, and let's face it, the acronym is very memorable. Here's what each of the letters stand for. C is for currency. Is the information current and up to date? This one is the easiest to check. When was the information published, and are there more recent updates available? R is for relevance. Is the information relevant to your needs? Why do you need this information, and does this particular source suit your needs, or is there something missing? A is for authority. Is the source of the information authoritative and trustworthy? We will go over this a bit more later with some source examples, but examples of authoritative sources are going to be .gov, .edu, and some .org websites. Other sources could be legitimate outlets like PBS, NBC, BBC, and so on. A lot of those are going to have .com domains. Or you can find several vetted sources that we provide through our website. All of our databases can be accessed from home with your library card or in the building at any time. And I've included a direct link to that in the chat as well. A is for accuracy. Is the information accurate, trustworthy, and reliable? This one is the tricky one to figure out, and it's the reason why seeking out multiple perspectives can be important. If you only seek out information from one perspective that you agree with, you're only going to get part of the story. Depending on the information you're seeking out, finding one good source may be enough, but for important information, it can be very helpful to check out more than one source and perspective. P is for purpose. Why does this content exist in the form that it does? This one is also a bit tricky, but a good thing to keep in mind is whether or not the content is sponsored. The easiest to spot is, of course, advertisements. Those are 100% meant to make you want to buy their product. So advertisements are designed to make you feel good about a certain product. With the news and other forms of media, ask yourself how the information makes you feel and why. Does it make you feel strong emotions? If so, it could be due to the way in which the information was presented. And if that's the case, then that's when it is important to seek another perspective rather than becoming polarized for or against something based upon how one source presents their information. If the information you're seeking out doesn't pass the CRAP test, evaluate what went wrong and seek out a better source of information. For example, if the information isn't current, try setting your search parameters to a certain date range to find more up-to-date information. Fact versus opinion. Because publishing online does not require any vetting process, the lines between fact and opinion have blurred significantly since digital news and media have become ubiquitous. Opinions can be good things as they can offer perspective. However, when they're presented as news, that's when the danger comes in. Sites like BuzzFeed, Vox, and Book Riot can and do have helpful information on them. However, it's important to remember that the purpose of sites like these is entertainment. Some are better than others, but they shouldn't be your primary source of important information. So, how do we tell the difference? First, use the skills that we've already covered in this presentation. Vetting sources and being aware of biases can go a long way. Then, ask yourself these questions. Does it seem like entertainment with flashy headlines, ads, and images? Clickbait and reactionary media can be tempting to believe, but quite often are full of bad information. What is the purpose of this media and how is it affecting me? If this media makes you feel very strongly about the subject matter, consider if it's because it's a reactionary piece with inflammatory language that is meant to get a rise out of the audience. If not, what sources have they credited to their research? If no sources are credited in a factual report, then there's a good chance that it's opinion or bad information. Now that we know how to spot the difference between fact versus opinion, how about false information? Utilize the skills that we've gone over so far and also read beyond the headline. Reading just the headlines doesn't give you all of the information. If you only read the headline, you miss out on the context and the context clues that tell you the full story and allow you to figure out if it's real or not. Repeating headlines only feeds into the spread of misinformation, so be sure not to simply share articles without reading them. Look at the author's name and information provided by the site. The author's information and byline or a lack thereof can tell you a lot about the text as well. Sometimes this is where you can spot AI or fake people. For example, if you see author name MD, winner of the Nobel Prize, 20 Pulitzers, and the Peabody, it's worth at least Googling their name because it's a little bit unbelievable. And make sure what you're reading isn't satire. Sites like The Onion can be fun to read, but satire isn't always that obvious. So keep an eye out for headlines that are meant to make you laugh about serious topics. That's your clue that it's probably satire. When in doubt, make sure to fact check. Fact checking can take just a few seconds, and I've listed some great options here for where to go for fact checking, including factcheck.org, Snopes, the Washington Post has their own fact checker, and politifact.com as well. So any of those would be useful to you. Where do you typically find your information? Social media, a news channel, Google? Revamp your search history and try some of these sources instead. Again, keep in mind that while these sources contain accurate factual information, no source can be 100% free of bias at all times, so use your discretion. So we have a fairly long list here. And I am going to share out this presentation to anybody who wants it, so you can have this in hand. We will do that at the end. And as a reminder, no one is perfect. No one will find every last bit of fake news, misinformation, and so on in the media. You'll fall for some of it and you'll spot some of it, and that's okay. You do not have to do all or even any of these things all the time. That would just be plain exhausting. But the next time you see a headline floating around on social media, look into it before sharing it to be a good digital citizen. Do a minute of research and think about what the subject is before blindly passing on potentially harmful information. In the end, that's what digital citizenship is all about, keeping yourself and others safe and informed. So I have my email here. If anybody would like their own copy of this presentation, go ahead and email me at this email address and I will send the slides to you. If anybody has questions at this point, feel free to unmute yourself or throw them in the chat. I will stay on for a couple of minutes if anybody has questions. Not seeing anything in the chat, but as a reminder, those links are here. I included library research resources. These are research tools, databases from our website, and then also the Advantis media bias map for anybody who's interested. You can just click those links and they'll take you directly to those sites. Okay, if nobody has any questions, I'll go ahead and end the meeting for all. Jot down my email address if you need it, if you have come up with questions later, if you want those slides, this is where you can contact me at. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.